Great conversation. We've got probably 100 people watching. And the one last week, I think we've already had over 1,000 folks take a peek at it. So that's very cool. So we should have a big group today, and hopefully a lot of good conversation, as well as some good questions, hopefully. So I believe Ben's hit the live button. So hi, if you're watching. It is 10 o'clock on the nose, so we have no time to chit chat. Good morning, appraisers. My name is Bryan Reynols. You're watching the Appraisal Report webinar, brought to you as always by Appraiser eLearning. Welcome. We're glad you're back. This was a lot of familiar faces. We were here just about a week ago, and this is such a hot topic and a lot of working pieces in this request for information. And as a consequence, we're back again today to continue the conversation. We welcome your question. So if you have a question for any of the panelists, please feel free to type that in. Mr. Ben Maxwell will get those over to us throughout the broadcast, and we will answer as many of those questions as we possibly can in the short time frame that we have together. These sessions are recorded, so if you can't watch this in its entirety, you can just hop right back over to YouTube, pick up right where you left off. In fact, you're watching us via the YouTube channel right now, so that we ask that you take just a second to go ahead and hit the subscribe button. That will put you in the know. We have a regularly scheduled webinar once a month, but we have a special edition webinar whenever, whenever there's breaking news or something exciting, or we just want to visit with you. So if you subscribe to our channel, you'll be in the know. Finally, last but not least, if you would like to be on the program, or if you know someone you think would be a good guest or has something interesting to say about our profession, please reach out to Ben Maxwell. And Ben, if you could put that down in the comments so that they know how to reach out to you, my friend, that would be excellent. Benjamin, if you could do one more thing, if you haven't already, if you could put a link to the document we're referring to in the chat box, so that anybody that's watching might want to grab their own and follow along with us today. I would appreciate that. So one last thing. If you're new and watching this one and you missed the last one, no fret. Just go back to the YouTube channel and watch last week's program on this topic. I'm going to break these four down, assuming that we do have some folks that weren't with us last week. There's four topics that we want to cover during this little mini series, is what I guess what I'm calling us, a mini. John, you didn't know you were on a mini series, did you?
Hey, I've got a face that was made for radio.
Well, you know, we can block you out if we need to. I'm kidding. So there's four primary topics that we want to address, all four. The first one is appraisal modernization, whatever that means. And that was our topic of last week's program. So if you missed that, go back and take a look at our very first broadcast on this topic. And we may bleed over into that a little bit today, but our primary focus today is topic number 2, 3, and 4. If we can get to all of them, it's likely we won't have time to get to the remaining 3. So we're probably going to be back again next week. But what we're going to start out today is with item number 2, that's entitled Updating the Uniform Appraisal Data Set, UAD for most of you. As well as redesigning appraisal forms, whatever that might mean. And then if we have time today, we're going to go ahead and attack the next topic, which is AVMs, automated valuation models, and appraisal waivers. So we'll try to start that conversation today, but we may have to pick the rest of that up next week. And then finally, the fourth topic that we're going to be discussing is valuation differences by borrower and neighborhood race. So we've got a lot to talk about. There's a lot going on in our profession. And just very quickly, I'd like to just introduce the panel of experts that we have with us today. If you want to see their whole bio, you can go back and watch last week's broadcast. But we have my dear friend, Miss Diana Jacob, with us. She is a practicing appraiser, USPAP instructor, and just a wealth of knowledge. Miss Melissa Bond. She is, you still an investigator? She was an investigator in Mississippi. She's been with the VA panel, and she's a boots on the ground appraiser. Mr. Scott Rose, certified appraiser, is with Class Valuation, and I believe that's the innovation officer. Is that right, Scott? I may get stuff wrong. It's hard for me to remember everything, and I don't use a script, so it's really hard for me. And finally, last but not least, Mr. John Brenan, who is at Clear Capital. Is that the chief appraiser there, John?
Sure.
Oh my God, I did okay for no notes. And then of course we have, as always, who's steering the steering wheel and pushing the buttons and navigating us to keep us on the road, Mr. Benjamin Maxwell with Appraiser eLearning. Thank you, Ben, for all you do. I appreciate it. All right, so let's just dive right in. UAD, and I'm gonna defer to my AMCs to start this session out. So, John, let's assume we've got someone watching, and I want to remind everyone, as well as my viewers, we have a very wide audience. We have appraisers, we have lenders, we have AMCs, we have investigators, we have members of the public, we have real estate agents, we have bankers, we have, just a wide variety of the folks that tune into this program, and we're very thankful for that. So, John, let's assume that there's some folks out there, maybe a commercial appraiser. They don't know what UAD is, right? So let's take a couple of minutes to inform the viewer, what is UAD?
Well, probably the simplest way I can explain it, Brian, is in the name itself: Uniform Appraisal Data Set. It is a series of data fields and constructs that allow the GSEs to collect and be able to sort and analyze data from appraisals. And as most of you know, the current primary forms that are used in residential appraisals, the URA, our Uniform Residential Appraisal Report, or the 1004, as the Fannie Mae number is, as well as the 70. They have fields that have specific characteristics that appraisers have to fill out that help populate that uniform appraisal data set. There are primarily one of the biggest things that a lot of appraisers, residential appraisers, needed to familiarize themselves with when this came out was the condition and quality ratings. So, you would say all the way from back in the day, where some of my esteemed colleagues here on this call, you would see people write condition as average, average plus, good minus, things like that you really can't quantify or put in some sort of easy to retrieve data. So instead, they've got condition ratings C1 through C5, C6. You can be able to provide that rating, which is a standard. And if you look at those ratings, for example, they have definitions of what those ratings are. It's not comparable to another property. It's what that condition or quality rating is. That's a common mistake that a lot of appraisers make, and sometimes there's a tendency to say, well, this is C3, the average condition. You really got to look at what those definitions are. But in a nutshell, it's the ability for the GSEs to collect the data from the appraisals in a way that they can assimilate it, sort it, and analyze it.
Yeah. So there was Fannie and Freddie had said there's a lack of consistency throughout the country. For instance, Miss Diana might say it's an average condition, and Melissa says it's average plus, and Scott says average minus. And I, of course, am right and say average to good. And John says below good. Well, all of those mean the same thing. So if we all say C4, we're on a consistent plane there. And so I think that was the idea behind the UAD implementation. Scott, so what's not working? I mean, why is there a need, or is there a need for
Sorry, you broke up there a little bit at the end, but I think I got the gist of the question and, why is there a need? I think, it's been since 2005. Correct me if I'm wrong, John, since we rolled out the last new edition of forms. And I
That's
think
right.
that what we're looking to try to do is take advantage and not only maybe add some additional standards to provide a cleaner data set, but also to look for ways to simplify the process for appraisers, for AMCs, and for lenders alike, to leverage kind of maybe a more simplistic way to approach it. Instead of having so many forms, maybe we'll condense it into a more standard form that has dynamic changes based off the property type you're working on versus having so many different forms that we use to complete different assignments. And I think that, along with also maybe being able to capture a little bit more information around certain aspects of what you're reporting on, whether it be images and things like that, now that we have so much more technology being used in the field by appraisers, to tie that to a closer to the standard so that it's reported in the data set in an easier decipherable fashion.
Yeah. So let's talk about that. And Diana and Melissa, I want to bring you into this conversation when we talk about the forms. And I teach classes around the country and now virtually as well, which is kind of cool. I always ask appraisers about the 1004 because that's a term we hear a lot, right? The 1004 form. And I said, well, I'm just curious, how many of you have done a 1004? And then I said, okay, well, how many of you have ever utilized a Form 70? And no hands go up. And I said, well, guys, I kind of tricked you a little bit. It's the same form, right? And you can see the form there. The actual name of the form is the Uniform Residential Appraisal Report. The Form 1004 is just Fannie Mae's form number. And I gotta throw a little love to Freddie Mac here because Freddie Mac's form number is Form 70. But what the interesting thing, and Scott alluded to this, is this date, March 2005, March in 2005. Guys, what that means is that's the last time that this report form was last revised. So, Diana, Melissa, do we need a new form? Or, this one's been working for, 16 years. Why do we need a new form? All the appraisers are very comfortable with that. We hate change like most human beings do. Is it time for a new revised form? Diana, what are your thoughts?
I thought it was time the day it came out.
Me too.
I really did. My first beef with it was the fact that they get into the measurement of a site and they have no definitions or symbols for waterfront. And I was like, I live in an area where we wear our boots more than we wear our shoes, or we go barefooted because we got so much waterfront feet in my area makes a big difference. Usable waterfront feet, they didn't have that. The other thing that I think we all thought, like you said, was that that rating system. Why don't I get to go ahead and say what I think? Why are you forcing me into this box? But as we grew with it, I think we saw that was okay. But there have been so many changes with USPAP. I had someone call me this week and said, I said that I inspected the property because I signed the form, but I made it clear in my addendum I didn't inspect the property, that someone else inspected it. Well, now you get into, is it the form that drives compliance or the signing appraiser's words within the addendum that drives the compliance? And so compliance, and I said it earlier to y'all, if we're going to go approach this, it shouldn't be every 15 years. You have USPAP that changes every 2 years. Could we at least say every 4 or 5 years that we revisit this and find the problems? But that in and of itself has to do with, cost and development and all of that. But I think there is a need for the form to be revised. My personal opinion.
I've been asking this question for years, and I'm surprised that Fannie and Freddie haven't banned me from asking questions. I remember at an appraisal conference one time, they were up on the stage, and I said, I have a question. And I said, I want to know how many loans have ever been denied based upon what the bathroom wainscot is? Has there ever been a loan denied based upon what the bathroom wainscot is? If not, could we take that off the form? I mean, is that something that that I, as a practitioner, have to waste my time writing down and provide it to Scott, who provides it to the lender that they absolutely do nothing with? You know, if you want us to be faster and more productive, let's take some of the nonsense stuff off. Well, Brian, that's a condition. You know, that's quality. We'll know what well, wasn't interior doors a measure of quality? Because that used to be on the form prior to 2005. And the powers that be decided that, you know, we no longer needed to say what the interior door was. So let's take some of that out. Melissa, what are your thoughts? If we were able to make some positive changes to these forms on the nonsensical part, like wainscot, you know, would that help appraisers out in the field be able to collect this data and report it a little quicker?
Well, Brian, I think you're going to find that you and I agree on that point. I think that there may be some particular data points within the 1004 that perhaps we can eliminate. You know, if they don't affect value, then it is something that the appraiser is taking into consideration in quality and condition anyway, and they're reporting the quality and condition of that property. We don't necessarily have to report every particular about that subject property. If the redesign of forms, and if, you know, what I'm hearing is it may be streamlined just a little bit, I think that's good. I think that we need a relook at the forms. I think that it is well time to go ahead, and if we're modernizing, let's modernize there as well. I will say that we all know that the appraiser is to remain USPAP compliant. The form is not to be USPAP compliant. That's an appraiser responsibility. Absolutely. So we can do that aside from having to report every little aspect of that subject. And I will end with this. I am a high proponent of the quality and condition ratings, because I think that it has forced us to put our thinking into boxes, if you want to call it that. But if we really take the time to read those definitions, yes, they're slightly vague, but you know what? They really hone in also. So, you know, I think it's time. And if streamlining is the ticket, you know what, appraisers need to acclimate, and they do, you know, and as you said, they may kick and scream at first, you know, some of us do, and then we embrace, I say embrace the change.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, so I'm a big proponent of, you know, who moved my cheese. Anyone that's heard me speak or read some of my writings, I mention that often. In fact, I'm finishing up a new course, and guess what I talk about? Change and who moved your cheese, because I like moving your cheese a lot and getting you to think. And but we as human beings, and in particular appraisers, resist it, don't we? I mean, when UAD came out, oh my God, the sky was falling. When the 1004 MC form came out, oh my God, what's going to happen? When the new forms came out 16 years ago, oh my gosh, what's going on? And then after a while, we realize, you know, it's not the end of the world. We can figure it out and move forward. So John, you probably have some idea. I know this isn't something that the GSEs just started working on. I mean, this is something that they've been talking about since 2018 and trying to figure out what makes sense. So can you give us some, you know, a lot of folks watching have no idea about a 1004P or any of the beta forms, what's around the corner. It's almost like everything's secret. And I know it's not intended to be secret, but can you give our viewers a little bit of insight in what's around the corner? I mean, what are they? I know no final decisions have been made, and that's what the request for information is. But what are they thinking? What would a new form look like?
Yeah, I think it's great. It's a great question, and it's going to be great for appraisers, a real improvement for appraisers. I think Ben in the comments has provided the link that that Fannie put out about the little video about the UAD changes, and that's just a very brief, very summary level video, but it helps familiarize you. Here's the thing, two things. Number one, part of the reason this needs to be fixed is, you say condition is C4. Well, does that mean that every part of the property is C4? What happens if a bathroom's been remodeled and no other parts of the house have, or the kitchen has, or you've got half that has been done in a very, very high quality level, and maybe an addition's been put on that doesn't meet that level? We're talking about a one size fits all, and as we know, that just doesn't work in life, let alone in appraisal. But I think, as Scott kind of alluded to when he talked, what they seem to be looking at is a more robust view of the features of the property, the characteristics of the property, in what might be a single uniform type approach that can apply to all sorts of different properties, to condos, to co-ops, to manufactured housing. You wouldn't need a separate form.
Now, I want to pause you right there because you're blowing people's minds right now. So what are you saying, John? I'm going to have a one form does all. Is that what you're trying to say? I'm going to put a 2 to 4 family on a single family form. And before he answers that, let me just say, USPEP doesn't care. Right. It's kind of what Melissa said a while ago. You have to be USPEP compliant, not a particular form, right? Forms don't comply with USPEP. Appraisers do, or they don't, but they're supposed to. So standard 2 does not dictate the form, format, or style of real property appraisal reports. So John, are you saying you're just going to give me kind of a template and I can put any kind of property type in there? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, I've been on the calls with the GSEs looking at this redesign. I've seen some of the things they're talking about, but I'm not with the GSEs, so I can't give you any kind of official word. And as you pointed out, nothing's been decided. But that is the general concept that they have talked about, having a core set of information that can then apply to different types of properties, and maybe even what I said as an improvement for appraisers is looking at breaking out various components of the property and describing the quality and condition of those components as opposed to one big item. So kitchen cabinets, good quality, good condition, etc. Going through different roofing structure, things like that. So there's a lot more information that they can characterize and describe, and then be able to assimilate better than just saying this house is average quality or C or Q3 or Q4 or whatever. So I think that's where, from what I've seen, that's where they seem to be going with this. Yes. Thanks,
John. And Scott, I want to rope you in on this because you might be able to give some additional insight. So what I've heard, a little birdie told me, and I, maybe it wasn't a good birdie, but that the forms are going to kind of be dynamic from a perspective of they change. So what I envision is I'm doing a condo. And so maybe at the very top of the form, I'm going to click condo. And now the form changes to accommodate a condominium form of ownership. Or I'm doing a 2 to 4 family and it changes for me to, comment on items inherent of a 2 to 4 family as opposed to a single family. So Scott, what do you have any additional insight on that?
I don't have insight into actually how that's going to work. I think, as John said, conceptually, I think the direction we're going is something similar to that. I don't know that the form would change when you click the button, or would it just add another section that you would complete based off the assessment of the condominium project that would associate to doing a condo, right? Because the physical attributes of a property, as John was talking about, condition of bathrooms, kitchens, flooring, things of that nature, are going to be the same across condos, single family residential, or 2 to 4 family, right? So I think it has to do with more understanding what additional aspects do you need to discuss and analyze and report on, or really report on, right? That you're able to deliver in that fashion for that type of property type, versus having a completely separate form to report, your findings. So I think that is the direction we're going. And I think there's still things to figure out. You've got a lot of people and a lot of stakeholders who are involved to make these things happen. It's not just that the forms providers are going to have to understand how they deliver this to their customers in the field, being the appraisers. The lenders, the AMCs, and everybody who's in the process has to understand how to take in an assignment that we've basically built processes around form types in terms of pricing and building scopes of work and engagement letters. So we'll work through all of that. I don't think it's something that's going to show up on a day one and be like, everybody, it's time to change. Good luck. Have a great day. I think we'll find that it will get more insight into ideas on how to solve this over the next several months, and then there'll be a rollout phase so that it's smooth and can support all of the stakeholders in a positive fashion. And I will say, I haven't been on all of the calls like John over the last couple of years. We have some others within my organization that participate in that, but I do know that it's very well represented. And there's people from all walks of life. There's several appraisers who are boots on the ground. There's AMCs, there's lenders, there's regulators. There's parties that all depend on.
Tell me, there's some
forms.
Appraisers though. Tell me.
Yeah, appraisers.
Okay.
Plenty of appraisers.
Yeah, absolutely right.
That was the first one I said, just to make sure.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely appraisers.
All right. Thanks, Scott. So Diana, if we've got somebody watching right now and they're thinking, this and this should be added to the form, and these 10 things ought to be taken off of the form, and they're very passionate and they have a very good basis for that argument, what should they do? I mean, should they get involved? Should they write a letter? Should they, have their board of realtors, chime in? I mean, someone out there that's watching that feels like, I'm just me. I'm just an appraiser. I'm a working appraiser. I don't have a lot of notoriety. What difference can I make? What would you say to that person if they have some great ideas that they think would make this better for all of us?
If you don't vote, don't complain. I think you have to be willing to state what you find is difficult. And even though you think maybe no one else is having this issue, I think you would be surprised that one issue raised by one person actually is reflective of many people across the country. So getting involved and staying involved, in my opinion, has always been the key to an appraiser, not just having a small voice, but a big voice. If we don't stay plugged in, we have no one to blame but ourselves for being kicked out. I mean, we have got to be a relevant part of this conversation, or we just need to step aside and say, well, I'm willing to walk whatever walk you want me to walk, and I won't say anything. I don't think we learn that way. I think we learn from voicing our opinions. And I don't mean just to criticize, constructive criticism. There needs to be a reason why you feel this change is relevant and necessary. And if you object to what the changes are, explain why, because we are, from our perspective, seeing it from our view. We aren't seeing it necessarily from the secondary market's view or the big data review. One of these questions that have come up, it's more big data that's going to be collected. I agree. I think that is absolutely part of what this whole process is about. But it doesn't have to be a weapon against us. It can actually be armor that works with us if we would be willing to open that conversation and share from our perspective why it is either problematic or contributory.
And she didn't know it, but she just gave me a great lead in for my next question for Melissa. So thank you, Diana, for doing something. You don't really know what you did, but I do appreciate it. But we're at the halfway mark. So let me take care of some housekeeping here real quick. Viewers, ladies and gentlemen, you're watching the Appraisal Report webinar brought to you by Appraiser eLearning. We have a free webinar, free, by the way, every month. It's typically the fourth Thursday of every month. And this month is no different. We have a gentleman coming coming up that has, I believe, 10 people in his office. He has 5 trainees, and we're going to have another conversation about trainees on our webinar at the end of the month. So I'm really excited about that. Go ahead and click the subscribe button if you haven't already done so, because that keeps you in the know, especially when we have a special edition webinar, which is what you're watching right now. As a reminder, all these sessions are recorded, so feel free to hop over to our YouTube channel, Appraiser eLearning, and you can search a ton of these that we've done over the past 3 or 4 years. We've had a lot of folks on, a lot of great conversations, and some great questions from you, our viewer. And thank you for being with us today. Finally, if you have any questions, please drop those over to Ben. He will get those to us, and we're going to get into those right after this question to Melissa. All right. So Melissa, I've got a question for you, and then panelists, we're gonna start answering some of these questions, if that's okay. And then after that, if we have time, we'll move down to the next topic on this request for information. So I'm going to go back, Melissa, to UADs for a minute. And one of the comments that appraisers have that I've heard in my classes is, they're just stealing our data. They're just taking our data to use it, and they're going to get rid of us. One of the things in this request for information is a question, and this is the question. And for those of you watching that have your copy, if you go to page 20, 21, 22, there are a series of questions that they're basically wanting answers to, okay? And so I'm on page 21, and the question is regarding the enterprises getting this additional data. It says, how could the enterprises make additional data available to appraisers while promoting appraiser independence without crowding out the data providers? This is the question. What additional challenges arise if the enterprises provide data to the appraisers? The one thing that we've complained about is you guys run your scorecard of appraisers, and you said, hey, John, you missed these 20 sales. Why didn't you? Well, I didn't know about them. Why didn't you give them to me, right, in advance? And I know there's some concern if they give those to you in advance, that some lazy appraisers out there that don't do their job will utilize that data to, oh, well, John sent me a bunch of sales from 150 to 175. I guess he's expecting the value to be somewhere between there. That's what I'm going to do. And that's not what I'm talking about. I think that if we get better data, we can render a better decision. And if I know Melissa appraised a house 2 weeks ago and it sold, and I want to use it as a comparison, I would love to verify the data from her, because I know the data is going to be more accurate. So Melissa, what are your thoughts with, should Fannie and Freddie let the AMC see it? Give us the keys to the machine. What are your thoughts on us getting their data? Oh, I can't hear you.
Sorry about that. I can say this. I think having more data at our disposal is best. Okay, we can make a better decision if we have all the data in front of us. I can say this, that I do not see that being provided with that data. I do not see that as a form of violating appraiser independence at all. I think if the information is provided, the appraiser should, in fact, look at that information. Now, I don't think the intent at all of that being provided is this is the data set you are to choose your comparables from. I don't think in any way is that the mindset here. So I think it's just additional data. It may be that it was not public data, and the appraiser would not have had access to that otherwise. So what we're doing is we're broadening the availability And the appraiser's role, as always, is to scale that down to those that are truly comparable, whether it's one the appraiser was able to get through the data systems that they have in place, or it was the one that was provided to them. It doesn't matter where it came from. If it's verifiable and it is in fact the true comparable, then by all means use it. I think the appraiser just needs to remember what their role is. And that's to find the best. And the best, if it's been provided, I think we should utilize that. And it can be provided in the right way.
Yeah, maybe we don't have them provided to us. Maybe we just have, if that's the worry, John and Scott and everyone, maybe we just have access to their database. So what I'm proposing is, instead of you sending me all the sales in a census tract or a subdivision, just don't even do that. I'll independently go search out the 6 sales that I want more information on. But instead of me using a sketchy data source or beating my head against the wall, you have probably the appraisals that were the appraiser did when those were subject properties, and now they're comparables. Let me just dial into your database and get the information directly from the original appraiser that did it. Now I have better data. I can make a better decision. The client benefits, the appraiser benefits, and ultimately the community, the public benefits, because I've got better data. Hey guys, let's get to some of these questions. And then if we can get to the next topic, we will move on down that, because I'd like to at least touch on that if we can. And I know some of my panelists today have some hard stops, so I can't hold them over. So Steve is saying, the current forms force the readers to look back and forth between the form and text addendum, making it really hard to read. Good point, Steve. I agree with you. Steve also says the text boxes are fixed because they were designed to fit on a legal page and into a typewriter. He's right. Time to modernize. Thank you, Steve. Excellent comments. And by the way, some of our viewers might not know what a typewriter is. So we have certainly modernized to where I don't know anybody using a typewriter now. About 10 years ago, I knew a gentleman that still typed them, but he's not with us anymore. So McKinney says, so it is likely that they will attempt to make the level of detail or big data even more granular in an effort to gather large quantities of objective and subjective data. And that's a question mark. So John, what's your response to that?
Well, I mean, I guess the question is pertinent to not just appraisal, but everything. Look, everything we do, they're collecting more and more data, right? I mean, the idea is that this is how the world works today. You know, you can get anything free if you put your email address in, so that they've got that information. Yeah, I think it's clear that the GSEs would like to be able to get more data, more specific data, and data that they can quantify that hopefully, to your point a minute ago, Brian, can ultimately serve appraisers in the long run.
Mm-hmm.
They got to just come off that data and let us in the club. You know, I mean, if Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac want great data, then provide us the keys to the machines that they provided to you guys, you know, and I say you guys, I mean my AMC friends here. Let us have access to that, because I'm not trying to do it to do something unethical, right? I'm doing it to try and be better at my job. Scott Cullen says, if the reader of the report understands more detail of the subject, but not the comparables, how does this help them? Scott, you want to take that one?
Sure. If the reader of, could you repeat the question for me, Brian?
Sure. Scott, my friend Scott Cullen asked the question, if the reader of the report, the appraisal report, understands more details about the subject, but not the comps, how does this help them?
Well, I mean, I think it's always beneficial to completely understand the subject property and the asset that you're dealing with. You have to remember that whomever is going to hold this loan downstream is looking at the asset to protect that mortgage. And if in the event that the borrower is unable to continue to pay the mortgage, what they have left is that asset. And the condition and how that property exists in its current form during that transaction is very important to them to understand, that they have a good solid asset there to protect that transaction. I think that some of the dialogue that's going on around the verifiable data sources of the comparables, if they were used in a sales transaction prior and that information is available, I think that is a great a way for appraisers to be able to verify the data, especially as we're moving into the future. MLS data continues to become more and more biased, and it gets manipulated to present it in a more favorable fashion. So you don't always know what you have when you're looking through the MLS, because someone is marketing that home for sale. They're green in the grass, they're blue in the sky. They're doing everything they can to the images to attract a buyer. So I think using it as a verifiable source is a great idea. And just to be clear, also, the AMCs don't have access to that level of granular data either. So this is something that I believe some lenders might get some aspect of insight into, but the AMCs and the appraisers are both in the same boat. Trying to understand what they have based on the marketplace.
Thank you for that, Scott. I'm
Sure.
wrong a lot, so
no, yeah.
That doesn't surprise me. All right, so let me ask this last question, and then we're going to shift gears to the next category, because I'd like to at least get started on that one if we can, and that one's going to be a hot topic, I think. So TP says, will the form be online based with appraisers having a unique login? Or will software providers like Alamode have forms that we complete and send out to the clients? John or Scott, either one, if you have any insight on that, have you heard anything down the grapevine?
I haven't heard anything specifically. I will say to Scott's point earlier that in these UAD redesign and forms redesign meetings, that there is great representation, including from software providers. I don't think it's the GSE's intention to put them out of business or somehow hamper their business. I think they will be involved. Whether or not there's also some sort of generic input, the question is about, that remains to be seen. I don't know the answer to that.
One last comment here, and I don't think this is a question. Texas Valuation Professionals, to maintain, I may be coming to Texas in a couple of weeks. I don't know. I'm thinking about coming down and sitting in on your ATA. And I think, Melissa, you're lecturing down there, I think, right? Okay. So I don't know. I haven't decided yet. To maintain independence, the appraiser needs access to better raw data. I think that requires not just the CE summary compilation, but the internal raw data, specifically photos from appraisals. And so a lot of great comments and questions. Let's move on to our next category, just to at least get that ball rolling. And this category is AVMs. That is your automated valuation models and appraisal waivers. And, I had Jim Park on a program. You guys can go back and watch that. We talked about appraisal waivers and, prior to, and John, Scott, or Diana, you guys might know this. I'm having a hard time remembering, but prior to, if it was 2019, probably, but whenever this occurred with the bank down in Tennessee, that was the first request, other than one a long time ago in the Mariana Islands about a waiving. I think that was on waiving appraisers having to get their CE in on time or something like that. But this was the first request for a bank to say, we don't want appraisals done. We're formally requesting a waiver. And what that means is, doesn't mean they don't have to get an appraisal. What they were going to request, and what they did request, was we want to be able to use other people other than credentialed appraisers to do the appraisals for this entire year. And they made that request. And unfortunately for the appraisal community, that one was denied. But there's been some subsequent requests since then. But in certain situations, they don't have to make that request of the ASC. They can just do one, right? So give us a little insight in that, and I'll let whoever wants to chime in and start the ball rolling on that, on an appraisal waiver or an AVM.
Well, Brian, if I can, I think
Sure.
the context of appraisal waivers in this RFI is not the state waiver that you're talking about,
Sure.
or the client waiver. I think it's
Sure.
about the individual transactional
Yes.
waiver, where the GSEs, under certain conditions, the loans don't require a full appraisal. They're able to use a property inspection
Right.
along with the data that they have. So I think that that's more where the question is, and I'll lead off saying, I'm a lifelong appraiser and I love this profession. There is absolutely a place for waivers in the lending business, in my opinion.
Yes.
If hypothetically I went out and bought $1 million house cash, and this is hypothetical, by the way, and let's say that somewhere down the line, I decided I've got my cash tied up in certain investments. And let's say my daughter wants a new car and I decide I want to give her this great gift because I'm buying $1 million cash house. I can do that. And so I want to take out a $25,000 or $50,000 credit line on my house that I paid $1 million cash for. Should I have to go through the process of a full appraisal? Should I have to wait for the time to process an appraisal? If my credit is impeccable, I have assets and I have enough collateral in my front porch to cover that,
Right.
why do we need a full appraisal? And again, understand, I am as pro appraisal as you can be, but we have to talk about what makes sense in the world and what makes sense in the lending community. So I think under certain circumstances, there is absolutely a place for waivers. Should they replace appraisals in all circumstances? Obviously not. An appraisal is still the gold standard and is needed in a great number of the transactions.
I'd
Yes.
like to follow up with that, John. I think you are absolutely correct. There is a segment of the loan transactions that take place that it is appropriate to have an appraisal waiver. There are others, and I'm going to go ahead and say, and you can refer to this in the chart in the RFI, when they're at the 80 and 90% loan to value. Personally, I have question about that. Now, lenders do want to make prudent lending decisions. So they are taking, just as John said, the entire piece, the entire pie, not just one slice of it, to make a decision if a waiver is appropriate or not. We've had appraisal waivers for years and years and years, guys. This is nothing new. There's not an appraiser I know that is not covered up with work right now. So all of these waivers that have, and you can look at the numbers, it's astounding the number of waivers that have already been in place, and appraisers are still working there. And I'm like you, a lifelong appraiser and a high proponent of what we do, but there is an appropriateness for waivers.
Yeah, so this pains me because I'm an appraiser and I love what I do and I'm all for the appraiser. But we bought a condo in Nashville last year in 2019, and put a big down payment down. I mean, I was going to buy that. It was the very last one. Tried to buy one a few months earlier, and I offered $5,000 above list price. And I tried to give $5,000 to the investor that was buying two to encourage him to buy one. Let me have the other one. And he wouldn't let me. So I lost out. And we were actually in Salt Lake City at the AXE conference. And I bought it while I was there. I bought a studio on the second level. Well, I don't have a lot of money, but I had enough. And the lady that was buying it with me, we're kind of partners in it. We look pretty good on paper. She looks better than me on paper and in person. But my point is they came back and said, we may get an appraisal waiver. We may do a desktop, or we may go ahead and do an appraisal. Now, I'm a consumer, and this pains me to say as an appraiser, but as a consumer, did I care about that being appraised? I could care less. It costs me money that I would have rather just kept in my pocket. It didn't matter what that appraiser said. I was buying that unit for $225,000 period, no matter what he said. And if he said it was worth 200, I would have just had to come out of pocket a little bit. Well, probably wouldn't have. We put a big down payment. But my point is, as a consumer, I didn't need it.
Mhm.
And coincidentally, they did go ahead and get the appraisal because it's a second home and investment. Airbnb is what I'm doing. Guess what it appraised for? The exact purchase price, right? And I haven't really even looked at, and maybe that's what it's worth. Maybe that's why it appraised for that. I don't know. I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. But Diana, aren't we really talking about risk? When we talk about appraisal waivers, and first of all, make no mistake about it, guys, it's the people with the money that can make the decision. They're lending money out of their pocket. If you were lending your money out of your pocket and you felt comfortable about it, maybe you would not require something additional. If you didn't feel quite as comfortable about it, you might say, hey, I need some additional collateral. I'm going to do cross collateralization, right? So Diana, aren't we really at the end of the day talking about just measuring risk when we talk about appraisal waivers?
I think we are. And I agree with everyone here that has spoken already. There are situations where waivers make sense. But I'm going to go back to another point that is just a sore rub with me when you said I could care less what the appraiser said. I'm going to get it no matter what. That's fine and dandy. But then when you said, and guess what? It came in at the price that we paid. So many people have a problem with that, thinking that the appraiser automatically just takes the contract price and says that's the conclusion of value. And in this modernization process, I think we need to recognize that we are not soothsayers. We are not people who necessarily know more than the buyer and the seller. You're an appraiser. You are more than an appraiser. You're an entrepreneur in many ventures of real estate. You have a wide background. You paid what you thought was the price worth for your benefit of ownership. Now, I'm none of those things. Should I decide that I know more than you? I mean, if your price that you paid is within my reconciled range of data, why would my opinion be worth more than what you, the actual buyer, paid? I don't think I have that power. I think sometimes when I look at all the numbers and I see that contract price is within that range, I'm not going to sit there and purposely say, no, it's worth less, because I don't want anybody to accuse me of coming in at a contract price, or I think it's worth more because I don't want anybody accused. I think it's okay to reconcile there as long as they reconcile. But the waiver is about risk. And I had an appraiser call a few months ago and they were like, I really want to find a way to come in at this value. And I said, what? Well, these are good. This is a vet. You know how I feel about the vets. This is a good person. I want them to get this loan. I said, hold on a minute. Let me ask you, you're a person who recently inherited quite a large sum of money because of the death of your parents. Yes. I said, well, why don't you take that whole inheritance and just back that loan and be done with it? And the appraiser said, what? I said, well, if it's not worth you losing your money that you inherited, why should they? I said, don't make the mistake that we're here to give people what they want or not give them what they want. We do our job. But a waiver says there is enough security in this property. We don't need, I don't go to a brain surgeon because my nose is running. We don't need always the same item for everything we do. And we need to be open to that.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Great.
So I was teaching a class the other day and we talked about oral appraisal reports.
Mhm.
How many of you, and not one hand went up.
That's
And
surprising.
then, how many restricted people do restricted appraisal reports? And I had a classroom of 50 people. And I had about 3 hands go up for restricted. And I said, guys, I'm going to help you make more money.
Mhm.
Keep an open mind.
That's
Quit forcing a 1004 form or a Form 70 down your client's throat when they don't necessarily need that or want that. They just want to know what their house is worth. They're thinking about selling it. So we've got some more questions coming in, and we've only got a couple of minutes left. And I wanted to move over to AVMs and talk about AVMs. Jeff Bradford, love him. Sorry, Jeff, if you're mad at me for dropping your name here, but Jeff said he thinks that all valuation services should be done by an appraiser. Man, I love that. So AVMs aren't. So we're going to talk about AVMs. We're probably going to have to wait and really dive into that subject next week. So you don't want to miss that. We're going to talk about AVMs. But let's try and knock out. We've got 5 minutes left. We got a couple of comments, couple of questions. Let's try and knock out as many of these as we can. James says, sounds like we're moving back to a narrative format for all reports, which is what it was and should have always been. Thank you, James, for that comment. Here's a question from TP again. TP, I wonder if that's their real initials. TP. I don't know, maybe. Regarding waivers, are they temporary due to the pandemic and current loan volume, or are they here to stay? TP, they're not a result of the pandemic. They were here before the pandemic, and they're going to be here after the pandemic.
Long after.
Wayne says, slippery slope, more like a slippery cliff, seeming they went from low LTV loans to purchases. Now, I kind of like that comment, Wayne. So does anybody have, Scott, you have any comments on that? I mean, Wayne's comment is, hey, maybe we can digest the appraisal waivers on a 20% loan to value or something like that. But now you're going to purchase transactions. And on mine, you know, they said they might do an appraisal waiver, and we had a very low loan to value, and they ended up still not doing it. And it was probably because it wasn't my primary residence. It was a second home. So even though we looked great and was putting down a bunch of money, it was still considered a secondary home or part investment home, right? So that made the risk go back up a little bit, and probably why they got an appraisal as opposed to a waiver. So talk about that a minute, guys, that a purchase transaction with not a low loan to value. Why are we doing appraisal waivers on those?
I think you have to consider all the factors that are contributing to these decisions being made. And just to be clear as well, purchase transactions with waivers, I don't recall exactly when they rolled out, but they've been going for a little while, and they're a much smaller percentage of the waiver rates that take place. And a big part of why we have higher waiver rates right now is because when we go into a low interest rate environment, many of the people who just refinanced or purchased a home in the last 2 to 3 years are all refinancing their homes now. And there was just an appraisal done on those properties for those transactions. Mm-hmm. And if you have that data and information readily available, and you have the borrower's payment history, and now you're reducing their payment even further, making them more credit worthy, then it makes sense to be able to provide waivers on the refis. Now on the purchase, we still see many people who waive their right for a waiver on a purchase because they want the appraisal. They want to understand the value before that they purchase that home. Unlike you, Bryan, where you knew you wanted it. Some people want to use that appraisal to further negotiate the transaction and make sure they're not overpaying for a property, and the appraiser plays an important role there. I think on purchases where they get utilized though, and while there's smaller percentages, there's other data, potentially a prior purchase, something else on that property, other information they're leveraging to try to make the best decisions they can that are not always fully transparent to the open marketplace.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. Now, one thing you said, I want to remind the appraisers watching right now, and Peter's not paying me, but maybe he should be. Peter, you didn't even autograph the book. I had to buy my book, and you didn't even autograph it for me. So you're hurting my feelings a little bit. So this is called risk management. I'm not getting paid to say this, although I should be. This is risk management by my good friend, Peter Christensen. You know, the first time I had him on a webinar, he said, later he told me I was a little nervous. I was nervous. You're nervous. So anyway, he's a great guy. I consider him to be a friend. He's an attorney. He wrote a book on risk management for appraisers. It's a great book. I'm partly through it, not done, but and so to Scott's point, he's saying appraisers ought to put language in there that says this appraisal is done for the bank for a mortgage finance transaction, not for you as a buyer to rely on it for decision for a purchase transaction. If you want an appraisal to rely on it for a purchase transaction, go get your own appraisal. This is, and a statement similar to that will probably reduce your liability in the event you're sued, because then you can point to that and say, hey, I didn't do it for them. I did it for the bank, right? Guys, we are completely out of time, and I'm keeping it right at 11 o'clock because a couple of my panelists had some heart stops, so you're welcome. And just real quick, I know you did this, and we've got a question from Taylor about AVMs. You're going to have to come back next week, Taylor. We'll answer your question at next week broadcast. Guys, we're going to be back to, what did we say, Wednesday, February the 10th at 10 o'clock Central Standard Time, where we'll continue this conversation and also get into the last category about potential bias. Diana, just run through the squares real quickly, if you wouldn't mind telling folks how they could reach out to you. You do some consulting for appraisers. If someone wants to reach out to you and get in touch with you, how do they do that, Diana?
My email address is my name, Diana, D-I-A-N-A-T, Jacob, J-A-C-O-B @yahoo.com.
John Brenan, you're next on my list.
John.Brenan @clearcapital.com.
Scott Rose, how can somebody get in touch with you?
srose@classvaluation.com.
And finally, Melissa Bond.
mbond@datastar.net.
And me, don't call me. I'm kidding. Bryan at Appraiser eLearning will work. Benjamin will put his contact down. So guys, we got to the third category, AVMs, automated valuation models, and appraisal waivers. We didn't completely get through with that. So when we come back on Wednesday, we're going to kick off the morning with that section. And then finally, we're also going to be discussing valuation differences by borrower and neighborhood race. You're not going to want to miss it. Listen, get involved. Melissa and I were on a call the other day with the National Association of Appraisers. I know Diana Jacob is a member. John and Scott are both supporters. If you need a home, please consider joining. We are crafting a response to this right now, and there were a bunch of us on a call, and man, we had a pretty intense conversation about this topic. This is big stuff. And so you have until, correct me if I'm wrong, somebody, February 26th, I believe, is your deadline to respond. So even if it's just you, respond. Thank you, Scott. Ladies and gentlemen, you've been watching the Appraisal Report webinar brought to you by Appraiser eLearning. Thank you very much for being here. For Scott Rose, Melissa Bond, John Brenan, Diana Jacob, and finally, my little guy there, Mr. Ben Maxwell, I'm Bryan Reynols, your host. Thank you very much. Until next time, hopefully next week, happy appraising. You're killing me, Ben.
We're done.
We're done.
Done.
Okay.
Okay.